Chapter 16, the changing roles of men and women. So if we look at traditional roles, they're changing a lot, and especially probably over the course of the last 30 years for sure, but 20 to 25, the traditional ideas of men and women, boys and girls, has been changing quite a bit. But it's also important to note that all cultures have this idea of what kind of behavior boys should have and a set of behaviors and rules for the way girls should act. This is reinforced throughout our lives by teachers, parents, what we see on TV, authority figures. And really, the problem is when you have this set of expectations, when people don't feel like meeting those expectations, they're seen as being not the norm. So, for example, maybe tomboys where they're more into sports instead of playing with dolls, and they may feel pressure to conform to stereotypes. And then you can also get discrimination on the basis of this because there's these expectations of how people should act and what roles they should have and what jobs they should have. And when you work in that mindset and you can't see the talents and the gifts and the abilities of the individual, regardless of what gender they are, you're going to run into problems and discrimination. So if we look at the changes in the roles of women, in the 1960s is really when you see the start of the women's movement, at least the modern one. The one from the 1900s, early 1900s, was to get the right to vote. When you see the one in the 1960s, Betty Friedan writes a book, and it's kind of interesting because when she interviews mothers, mothers of the 1960s are okay with the roles that they have and the limitations that were placed on them by society. But the overwhelming majority of those moms want something different for their daughters. They want daughters to have the ability to have a career. They want their daughters to have the ability to be an executive. They want their daughters to have the ability to do whatever it is that they want. So the attitudes really starts changing about that time. More and more women are assuming the breadwinner role. This last recession is sometimes nicknamed the man recession because so many men were impacted. And at one point, I think this has been reversed, but at one point, for the first time in the country's history, there were more women in the workforce than there were men. So more than 50% of all the workers were women at one point in time. And that may have changed in the last few years, but 2 or 3 years ago, the majority of people in the workforce were women. More and more women are furthering their education, and you can see that at all levels. You have more women graduate from high school or from college. You have more women going on to graduate school, and so soon they're going to far outpace the male counterparts. Graduate schools are soon to become 60% women, 40% men. And so with that, more women are pursuing non-traditional jobs. They're not doing the stereotypical female jobs. And if we look at men, the roles of men have been changing too. And traditional expectations of men are pretty unhealthy and unrealistic. When you have this traditional view of men as breadwinners and the sole providers for the family, the problem with this last recession, and we saw it in the Great Depression, is it places a lot of stress on men that isn't probably very realistic. The last recession shed a lot of male-dominated jobs, and they're just not there anymore. It's something like under 65% of working age men have jobs. So that means 35% of men, or a little bit more than that, are stay-at-home dads or doing non-traditional jobs. So, and you're starting to see too that men are starting to shift how they define their life, from being the breadwinner to being more of a family man and being able to balance career and family. That's really started to change over the last 30 years. And so men are also pursuing more non-traditional jobs. And there's this burden of job loss that I talked about that is really changing our economy. So traditional roles, where's the balance? For both men and women, you got to realize that society has certain messages and you need to be able to face those and look at your own individual situation. You need to realize that parenting and career goals can be balanced. And it was kind of interesting because I think I shared an article with you about how money can buy happiness. And the way it buys happiness isn't through having possessions, but you can buy happiness by saving up and going on family vacations where you're building memories. And the difference between having possessions and building memories is every time you bring that memory back, you can bring back the laughter, the joy, the happiness. It has a net positive addition to your life. And so that's starting to change a little bit too. I think more and more people are starting to realize that quality family time is more important maybe than having a bigger house. And so that's starting to change. And you need to be able to both be career and family minded. That is an expectation, and sometimes you got to figure out how to balance those two things out. So problems facing women in organizations, there's a big wage gap, and they've been talking about this for a long time. Since the 70s, they've wanted to have an Equal Pay Act. That hasn't happened. If you look at these earnings gaps, so what are some of the factors that impact the wage gap? Some of it is discrimination. So because men who hire women think that they're maybe not able to do some of the higher end jobs, they hire them at a lower point in the company, and then women have to work their way up. Well, if you start 2 steps down below your male counterparts, you're always 2 steps behind them, and so it makes it difficult. Some of it is the jobs that women go into versus the jobs that men go into. More women go into nursing and elementary teaching. Those have lower pay than men who tend to go into engineering, which is higher pay. So some of that is the impact on wage. Now, if you have two individuals, a man and a woman, who are both doing the same job, same amount of hours, you're still going to see that wage discrimination in there. So the glass ceiling is this idea that women are only going to get so far up in an organization, and then once they get to that glass ceiling, they can see that there's 2 more levels or 3 more levels above them, but they can't bust through, and it blocks their ascent. So when we look at men versus women and why they think that glass ceiling exists, you can see 2 different points of view. So women attribute 2 different things to the glass ceiling. One is that they're excluded from informal networks, so they're not able to make those connections that maybe men make that help them leapfrog up the ladder. And then preconceptions held by men that keep women in lower positions. Men attribute glass ceilings to lack of general management and line experience, and they're less time in the pipeline. In other words, maybe women took time off to raise a family, and so because of that, they're not able to bust through that glass ceiling. So they have 2 different points of view on that. So when you look at it, balancing career, the mommy track is women who want both a career and children. These multiple roles can be stressful and extremely tiring. And so when women and girls, when you're looking into going into the world of work, there's a couple things that can really help out. One is having a partner that's supportive of that, having a career that's flexible and supportive, and an organization that's going to value both of your goals, your work goal and your family goal. And if you can do that, it's going to greatly reduce stress. So if you look at problems facing men, men working with women, male attitudes has been changing over the years, but sometimes you have older men who are stuck in their mindsets, and that makes difficult workplace. More men seem to be able to work with women and realize that they're intelligent, they're ambitious, they're confident, and they have all the skills that men have. And so they are starting to recognize that women make great leaders and co-workers and team members. Now, if you look at some of the problems that men run into, though, is this work-life balance. The stereotype is that men are supposed to be more career-oriented, more career-focused, and so the emphasis is on being the breadwinner versus the homemaker. That causes a great deal of stress. There's conflicts, again, just like women, having it all. Marriage, parenthood, employment, home ownership. That causes a great deal of stress and conflict, and how do you rank them and order them and make sure. Paternity leave and discrimination. It's much easier for women to take time off after having a child. It's harder for men. Why do you need to take time off? It's not like you really did anything. So there's that level of discrimination that's there. The other problem is men are less likely to maintain a healthy lifestyle and seek out health care if their life is out of whack. If they're getting sick or if they're mentally stressed out, they're not very good about seeking out help, which leads to unhealthy lifestyles. And so that causes problems. So if we look at some of the challenges and opportunities, organizations are starting to realize that families have problems with finding quality childcare and flexible work hours. And childcare is a real problem. Something like 80% of employers say that their employees need to take time off because of problems at daycare or childcare. So it's really hard to find good work. So some of the ways that they are addressing this, for example, Google has in-house daycare. You bring your kids to work with you, you drop them off at the daycare center, you can check on them periodically throughout the day. So the on-site daycare center is huge. Some companies are offering vouchers to help pay parents to afford daycare costs. It is expensive to send kids to daycare, believe me. I've done it. It's a lot cheaper when they're going to school now. And then pre-tax deductions on child care costs can help a little bit. If you look at flexible work schedules, some companies are trying to figure out better ways to have their employees work. And it's kind of interesting because one of my friends out in Colorado, he's able to do this flex. So he goes in at 7 in the morning and he leaves about 3 or 3:30 in the afternoon. You have this 6.5 core time, but people who are early risers and they want to get into work early and they want to be home in time to see their kids come back from school can come in early. And then maybe you have another parent who gets them sent off to school and stays a little bit later. So it really works out to be a little bit more flexible. You also have a compressed work week. You have 4 10-hour days, virtual assistants where you have people who can help take care of some duties. You can job share where you have 2 part-time employees. One works in the morning, one does the job in the afternoon. You have telecommuting where you can work from home. You have results-only work environment where you show up and maybe you have a goal for that day, and if you accomplish that goal, you can leave whenever you want. So as long as you meet your goals and expectations, you can move on down the road and get home. So if we look at coping with gender bias behavior, women in non-traditional roles tend to encounter a lot of resistance and discrimination. There's also sexual harassment, unwelcome verbal or physical behavior. Employers have a legal and moral responsibility to prevent it. 2 forms, quid pro quo, which means someone is maybe expecting something. So for example, a woman gets a job promotion and the man is expecting sexual favors in exchange. That's harassment. A hostile work environment where the behavior makes girls or women feel uncomfortable and it's abusive. So if we look at how to deal with it, what the victim needs to do is tell the harasser that the behavior is inappropriate. Because the moment you say, I don't like this, stop doing it, when it happens again, it's harassment, just like it is at school. Record occurrences in journals, talk with coworkers, speak with a higher supervisor. What the company needs to do, have a zero tolerance policy, and they need to come down hard and tell people that this is completely unacceptable. Communicate that policy to employees and make sure that victims can report without retaliation. So if we look at communication, though, there is differences in gender and how we communicate. There's linguistic style differences between men and women. Men tend to be more direct. They tend to dominate and interrupt discussions. They minimize doubts in themselves. They tend to have humor by banter and teasing. Women emphasize politeness. They speak with frequent pauses for taking turns. They downplay uncertainty, and they tend to use their own life experiences as a way to express humor, and they poke fun at themselves a little bit more than poke fun at someone else, where men poke fun at other people. So it's 2 different ways to communicate. Few words of caution. Stereotypes are very strong. They tend to be very inflexible. Those people who have stereotypical views tend to be kind of closed-minded, and they're very unlikely to change their views. You need to flex your communication style regardless of gender. New organizational etiquette and responsibilities are independent of gender. In other words, what that means is that the traditional ideas and roles and rules for men and women are breaking down, and organizations need to be flexible and adaptable to that. And all written materials need to use gender-free language. There shouldn't be anything in there that suggests this is male or female or man or woman. It should be just non-gender specific language.